the quality of seawater. Now we are talking about indirectly how we are polluting the marine environment. The sewage treatment, which is done to the sewage in the sewage treatment plant, where is the residue dumped? It is dumped in the water. Okay, so marine water gets polluted. Then other pollutants from the industry, like chemicals, these are again treated and dumped in the water. So, about few decades back, about 3-4 decades back, it was considered that the sea is so vast and it can take all the crap which we throw, right from plastic to sewage to garbage to dead bodies. सब कुछ डाल दो उसके अंदर, it will be able to decompose it, and it is. But no, 4 decades back, it was decided that no, if we pollute the water, which is 71% of our Earth's surface area acquired by it, then we are destroying the planet slowly but surely. So, marine pollution is specifically caused by what? Direct discharge of sewage into the sea. Now, if you don't discharge directly, you send it to the sewage treatment plant. We saw that when we did water pollution. The sewage treatment plant will treat it, it will chemically treat it, and then it will be allowed to go into the sea. That doesn't mean that it will not cause any damage to the seawater. The quality of seawater will still degrade, but at a lesser rate than if you discharge it directly. Pesticides and fertilizers wash off the land by rain. So when these pesticides and fertilizers are used for farming, they get washed off, they go into the river goes and joins the sea, and the water gets contaminated again. Petroleum and oil wash off from the roads. Again, when you are making roads in the hilly areas, the ghats, and there is a rainfall, this water washes off all the oil and grease and all what is there on the road, the tar from which the road is made, and the water is again contaminated, which goes to the rivers, lakes, or to the sea directly. Discharge of cargo or bunkers into the sea. Now, this is from the ships. Okay, there is a famous incident. I don't know how many of you are aware. After which Marpol came into, not actually Marpol, OPA 90 came. OPA 90 means OPA, Oscar Papa Alpha. OPA stands for Oil Pollution Act 1990, which Americans brought and passed a bill in their parliament to be applicable to all the ships, tankers which carry oil to America. But again, that was superseded by Marpol, which is applicable for all over the world now. So, discharge of cargo. Now, accidental discharge, ships get grounded, ships get into collision, and if the tanks which are carrying the cargo of oil get ruptured, where is this oil going to spill? In the sea. Okay. Anybody knows about Exxon Valdez, the famous oil pollution case?
Yes, sir. When my dad is in that company.
Dad is in that company. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So he's sailing or he's ashore?
Presently he's sailing, but now he's off days.
Okay, on holiday vacation. Okay. Now Exxon Valdez was a big disaster, and after that, lot of precautionary measures were taken, lot of rules and regulations were changed, and after that, again in 2010, the British Petroleum, one of the oil rigs are platforms which are used to extract oil from the seabed. So, oil and gas industry in the in the US, this happened, and again was a big disaster. This British Petroleum company is now bankrupt because of this oil pollution which took place. We'll see that. I'll show you a video on Exxon Valdez also. Effect of organic matter from sewage is similar to the effect in water pollution discussed earlier. Okay. Now what happens is the sewage, which are the treatment plant में पहले क्या होता है aerobic decomposition होता है anaerobic decomposition होता है. So these are the microorganisms which are used for decomposing the organic matter. So this organic matter which is not decomposed and directly sent into the sea is going to pollute it anyways. So like aerobic followed by anaerobic oxidation, if we do that, like aerobic oxidation is going to deplete the water of the oxygen. Okay, and depletion of water means high concentration of H2S gas, that is hydrogen sulfide or even methane. Control measures are also similar like sewage treatment plant which reduce the biological oxygen demand, the bond before it is discharged into the sea. So we have to reduce this before. That's the reason the water is treated so that less harm is caused to the quality of the seawater. For prevention of oil pollution from tankers, read page 164, 165. 164, 165 refers to the MARPOL Annex 1, which is prevention of pollution by sea, by ships due to oil. You can see here in the picture, what is this? This is an oil platform, okay, or oil rig, call it an oil rig. It is used for extracting the oil from the seabed, the crude oil. That crude oil is then transported by the ships to the various parts of the world. And in those parts of the world, they are then sent to the refineries and various products like diesel, naphtha, petrol, kerosene, all this is extracted from the crude oil. So they can be transported as a product or they can be transported in large quantities. When you say super tankers, these tankers are associated with large quantities of crude oil. This vessel here is a small vessel which is called an offshore supply vessel, which facilitates crew change, what you call provisions, and all the equipments required by this oil platform. So it will keep supplying this. If this one is replenished, it will go to the other one. And you can see the oil which is spread around this. Now, this is a picture of an oil rig where this happened in the BP, British Petroleum Company. Marine pollution, marine oil pollution, dry dock. What is dry docking? Any idea? Anybody can?
Maintenance of a ship like painting, chipping, all rusting.
Yeah, but why dry dock? That painting, chipping, the rusting can be done when the ship is sailing outside. What is dry dock? Dry docking is maintenance of the ship of those parts which are not accessible when the ship is afloat. Okay. The underwater part, which is always underwater, the propeller, the rudder, all these things are to be accessed after taking out the ship from the water. So how can you take out the ship from the water? Any idea?
By grounding it on a land.
Right?
Ground on a land.
Yeah. So to bring the ship on a dry land, it is not easy to bring it and then again after repairs afloat it. So there is a special area which is called a dry dock. I will show you a video on that. In the dry dock, the ship is brought into the bay alongside, and then the water is pumped out from there after locking it, so that the ship sits down on the land. And since the profile of the ship is not so flat, it has to be sitting on blocks. Otherwise, it will topple on one of the sides. That's called a dry dock. Dry dock during this period when the cargo compartments are to be completely emptied, residual oil finds its way into the sea. Tanker operations, tanker ships. After a tanker has unloaded its cargo, some ships have to take seawater as ballast in the cargo tank. During the unloading of the cargo, a certain amount of oil remains clinging to the wall of the tanks, and this may amount to about 800 tons in a 2,000-ton tanker. The ballast water thus becomes contaminated with the oil. During loading, when ballast water is discharged, it may contain oil. Now, as per the regulations. As per MARPOL, you cannot discharge this contaminated oily water mixture directly. It has to go to a slop tank where it interfaces, where the oil starts floating over the surface of the water, and the water which is below is a mixture of oil and water, which can be discharged through a system called ODMCS. ODMCS stands for Oil Discharge Monitoring and Control System, where the equipment functions by detecting by a sensor the content of oil in the oily water mixture. If the content of oil in the oily water mixture is more than 15 parts per billion, this ODMCS will sense that, and it will automatically close down the discharge valve and redirect this oily water back to the slot. Okay. And there are different criteria to be followed for this discharge. One of them is that it should not be in a special area. So there are special areas which are dedicated as per the Annex 1 of the MARPOL. And outside special areas, you need to follow the criteria like it should be en route. It should not be at anchorage or alongside or berth. It should be en route, means it should be moving, where about 50 nautical miles away from the nearest land. Okay. And the ODMCS should be in operation while discharging this. Secondly, the instantaneous rate of discharge at any given time should not be more than 30 liters of oily water mixture per nautical mile. Okay. Thirdly, the amount of total quantity of oily water mixture which can be discharged from the ODMCS should not be about 1:30,000 of the total amount of cargo which was carried in the previous voyage. So this is the discharge criteria for oily water mixture from a tanker and which is outside the special areas. In special areas, you can't discharge it all. This is talking about oily water mixture. What about the oil, the pure oil which is on the surface of the water? That cannot be discharged at all. That has to be sent to the sludge tank, and then when you go to the port, it has to be given to the shore reception facilities. Bilge and fuel oils. Now, there are bilges in the machinery space of the ship, whether it is a tanker or whether it is a non-tanker. Machinery space, that is the engine room, is there for every ship. And in the engine room, since the machinery is working, there is use of oil, lubricating oil, cylinder oil, hydraulic oil. All this oil leaks out from certain places during maintenance, during its normal operation, and this goes to the bottom part of the engine room, that is called the bilge. In the bilge, if it is mixed with the water, this oily water also can be discharged from the ship by using a separate equipment called oily water separator. It functions same like a ODMCS, but for a small quantity of oily water mixture. Okay. Again, 15 ppm is the requirement. Otherwise, it will be sent back to the bilge tank. While being pumped overboard, it carries oil into the sea. Individually, the quantity of oil released may be small, but it becomes a considerable amount when all the shipping operations are taken into consideration. Tanker accident. A large number of oil tanker accidents happen every year. Sometimes this can result in major disasters, such as Exxon Valdez. So Exxon Valdez was a case study which was taken into account that disasters can take place at a huge quantity of oil being disposed or spilled into the seawater, which then with the wave goes to the shore and the whole coastline gets contaminated with oil. The flora, fauna on the marine flora, fauna gets destroyed. And when it gets destroyed, tourists don't come to these areas. Tourists don't come, then the hotel industry suffer. So it is a multi-fold loss and damage to the industries. Offshore oil production. I showed you an oil rig which is responsible for extracting oil from the seabed, which contains some water. Even after it is passed through oil water separator, water that is discharged contains some oil. 15 parts per million is allowed. So some contamination is still there in that water, which adds to marine pollution. Surely, slowly but surely. Drilling muds, which are pumped down oil wells. When you need to extract oil, you need to drill in the seabed to get the fossil fuels. Then this, when you are drilling, the mud which is pumped down oil well when it is being drilled normally contains oil, which is later dumped on the seabed beneath the platform, thus heavily contaminating the water. Uncontrolled release of oil from the wells in the case of an accident can be catastrophic events resulting in oil pollution, as it happened in Gulf of Mexico on board a Shell drilling platform. Shell is a company. Now, what are the effects of marine pollution? Apart from eutrophication, a large amount of organic waste can also result in development of red tides. These are phytoplankton blooms of such intensity that the area is discolored. Many important commercially important marine species are also killed due to clogging of the gills or other structures. So, effect of marine pollution I will discuss with you in detail later on. First, I will show you a video on what is a dry dock so that you can understand and visualize what I'm talking about instead of trying to think that what I'm talking is alien. Just a minute. Tomorrow there are no classes. Are there classes or no?
So, Division 1 doesn't have.
Can't hear you. Division becoming broken. Division 1, their classes are there. As far as the message sent by Prasad sir, Prasad sir ने कल मैसेज किया था, which said that today there will be division 2. Today is 17th or 16th? 16th. On 16th, online classes will be conducted only for division 2. There will be no class for division 1 on 16th now. 17th, no classes as cadets will be busy with external practical exam. 18th to 50th, Saturday we will have regular pay online classes. Saturday you have to pay for classes. Is it so? Saturday we will have regular pay online classes. तुम लोग को मैसेज नहीं आया?
Yes, sir.
Saturday you have to pay.
Class on Friday.
I'll give you my bank account number. You pay and then only classes. That while typing online के साथ में pay online भी. So typing mistake. Okay, so here is a short video which will explain you what is a dry dock and how ships once in 4 years they have to go for dry dock. Actually, it is twice in 5 years, but if you are not able to, then once in 4 years is compulsory. Can you see the video? Is it visible?
Ships these days
Yes, sir.
cost millions of dollars to build, and then occasionally, like everything else on the planet, they need maintenance too. Have you ever wondered how it is done, or more precisely, where does that happen? That happens in dry dock, where the ship is taken out of the water to access those parts which are usually underwater. Dry dock is a structured area wherein construction, repairs and maintenance of merchant vessels and boats are carried out. This unique construction or arrangement allows the water to be filled up in an area, also known as a lock, so that vessels can be maneuvered in and out of that area. As per Safety of Life at Sea or SOLAS requirements, all merchant vessels require a complete survey of the hull in a dry dock, twice within an intermediate survey within not more than 36 months. This includes maintenance of hull, propeller, rudder, etc., and other parts which are immersed in water and are normally inaccessible by staff when the ship is sailing. There are different types of dry dock facilities available all over the world, out of which graving dock and floating dock are most commonly used. Graving dock is normally constructed on land near the coastal waters with a rectangular solid concrete construction with blocks, walls and gates. The vessel is shifted inside the dry dock and rested on the blocks. After the ship is in the required position, the gate is closed and water is removed. A floating dock is in the form of U structure, which is mainly used in salvage to carry ships that have met with an accident and is damaged to an extent that has made them unable to sail further to a coastal dock. However, now many regular seagoing vessels, small and mid-sized, are also dry docking in a floating dock. Several U-type floating docks can be joined to carry a large vessel. Once the type of dry dock is selected by the manager of the ship, the next process is to prepare the ship to enter the dry dock and then place the ship's keel carefully on the blocks provided in the dry dock floor. When the ship touches the blocks, there is a reaction at the point of contact which raises the center of the gravity, G, and reduces the metacentric height, Gm. Hence, adequate initial metacentric height is required to compensate the same. While entering the dock, the vessel needs to be upright, which means that there should be no port or starboard list when the ship touches the blocks. If the point of contact of the ship and keel blocks is outside the center line of the vessel, it may force the vessel to tip over. A moderate trim aft is usually kept when making the ship's keel sit on the keel block. As the water level in the dock lowers, the slight trim allow ascending of stern and bow in tandem rather than simultaneously, which will reduce the load and pressure on a hull and keel of a vessel. The floor of the dry dock is lined with keel blocks, which are also arranged such that they can bear the weight of the ship. The interval of time from when the stern takes the blocks to the moment when the entire ship's weight is borne by the block is called critical period. So what happens during this critical period and why? When the ship's stern just touches the keel blocks, part of the ship's weight is being borne by the keel blocks. The contact between the stern and the keel blocks creates a normal reaction or upthrust. The magnitude of this upward normal reaction increases as the water level in the dry dock reduces. Hence, it is very crucial to maintain sufficient positive metacentric height before docking, lacking which the ship may heel over to either side or even slip off the keel blocks and capsize. The maximum pressure that can be exerted on the blocks is a function of the material used for the blocks. This value, being a constant, the minimum block area required for each block is calculated. If you observe the nature of the weight curve, it is usually high at the midship region and decreases at the forward and aft region. The pressure exerted on keel blocks is called the block pressure, and the average block pressure is the total weight of the ship divided by total bearing area. After all planned work has been completed, the dock is flooded and prepared for vessel departure. The most important thing at this time is to ensure all the openings done for repairs are shut and hull is intact. Also, a complete stability check of the ship is to be carried out to ensure that acceptable metacentric height (GM) is achieved once the ship is clear of the blocks. The vessel is then towed out of the dry dock with the help of tugs and shipyard personnel. Once the vessel reaches a safe anchorage area, the ship undergoes sea trials to ensure all machinery, including those undergone repair, are working fine. On completion of sea trials, the vessel is commissioned back to the service. Dry docking is one operation which allows the ship's crew to learn those areas of the ship which cannot be explored when the ship is sailing. It also helps the ship manager to assess the condition of the ship's hull and those machineries which are not accessible when the ship is in water. The world's largest dry dock is presently in India, which is 662 meters in length and 65 meters in breadth.
Any questions from your side?
No, sir.
So now we will see how the marine pollution took place in Exxon Valdez case. Exxon Valdez is the name of the ship which was the one which polluted the Alaskan waters.
An oil tanker ran aground today off the nation's north. An oil tanker ran aground today off the nation's northernmost ice-free port, Valdez, Alaska.
One of the worst oil spills in U.S. history brought Americans images of blackened beaches, dying wildlife, outrage, and betrayal.
The evidence is that the response was slow and inadequate.
Blame soon centered on the tanker captain.
It is now clear that the captain of the tanker, who was not on the bridge at the time of the accident, had been drinking.
But the accident also exposed the inattention to oil industry safety and led to promises to repair the damage that had been done.
We will consider whatever it takes to keep you whole.
And to do more to stop future spills.
We also rededicate ourselves to transportation safety and to realistic planning for accidents that do occur.
Nearly 25 years later, what happened to the promises made in the wake of the Exxon Valdez?
The Gulf spill might already be as much as 3 times worse than the Exxon Valdez disaster.
Just past midnight on March 24th, the supertanker Exxon Valdez crashed into a reef off the coast of southern Alaska.
One of America's most magnificent waterways is blackened and befouled tonight by the biggest oil spill in American history.
240,000 barrels, 11 million gallons of Alaskan crude oil escaped from the huge vessel.
The oil industry's response plans had promised a swift cleanup in the event of a spill. But Ricky Ott was alarmed when she flew over the wreck.
We're 9 hours after the wreck, and there was not a speck of promised recovery equipment on the water. This had all been promised within 6 hours, and we were 3 hours past 6 hours, and nothing.
Neither Exxon nor Alyeska, the oil pipeline company in charge of the immediate response, was ready for such a large spill.
Alyeska was supposed to have an emergency response team at its terminal in Valdez, but 8 years ago the team was disbanded.
The response vessels were either under snow or being repaired. They were completely overwhelmed. Coast Guard didn't quite know what to do.
Equipment to fight the spill has to be flown in from as far away as Texas and England.
Exxon says it's using all available resources, but it argues the spill is simply too big to surround with booms and skim it up.
As images of the spill appeared on the evening news, Exxon began limited tests of chemical dispersants to try to break up the oil. The dispersants were controversial, and it was unclear if they would work or cause even more harm.
The chemicals that you use to cause the oil to sink is very dangerous to marine life, and we have to be certain that we cause a minimal amount of damage.
But it was soon too late to matter.
Winds up to 70 miles an hour virtually shut down the oil spill cleanup operation this morning.
The storm had come up and the oil was moving, and almost nothing could be done.
Some crews are literally on their knees using absorbent towels to remove the oil from rocky beaches.
Less than 15% of the oil was recovered. News cameras captured the damage.
800 miles of shoreline already covered with oil.
And the anger.
This should have been the easiest spill in the world to clean up.
Growing questions about how future disasters of this kind can be prevented, and why there was such a slow response to this spill.
At the same time, another storyline was also taking hold.
The Exxon spokesperson says there might have been a problem with Captain Hazelwood. It seems he had a bit of a drinking problem.
Good evening. The captain was drinking. The captain has been fired. That is the sum of it from Alaska tonight.
The story became Hazelwood.
Top 10 excuses of the Exxon tanker captain. Number 10 was trying to scrape ice off the reef for margarita.
That's a sensational kind of story. You have an immediate assignment of responsibility, an immediate villain. What was lost in all of that was the company's responsibility.
When a pipeline to bring oil from northern Alaska to Valdez was approved in 1973, the oil industry and the federal government promised to make safety a priority.
The Alaska pipeline's on its way. The environment will be saved.
The government initially supported double-hulled tankers and a high-tech navigation system in Valdez.
We were given blanket assurances about safety and spills. In retrospect, I erred in not making sure that what was said was not put in writing.
Those promises never materialized, and when the state of Alaska passed its own safety law, the oil industry sued, saying the law infringed on federal authority.
The court threw out the state's plan, so no double-hulled tankers, much more freedom to determine where the navigation channel would be.
When the pipeline first opened, tankers were closely monitored by the Coast Guard and stayed in the shipping lanes even when they were clogged with ice flows.
Instead of diverting out of the channel, they were supposed to slow down.
But by the time the Exxon Valdez left port, the Coast Guard routinely allowed ships to leave the channel to avoid the increasing amount of ice.
Slowing down was not something they want to do because time is money.
Judging by our radar, I will probably divert from the TSS and end up in the inbound lane if there's no conflicting traffic. Over.
A few minutes after that message, the Coast Guard wasn't monitoring the Valdez on its radar.
The Coast Guard is supposed to be the check in case the ship makes a mistake, and they weren't watching the ship.
Captain Hazelwood turned the bridge over to third mate Gregory Cousins and went to his quarters after giving instructions to maneuver around the ice.
Did you have any concerns about getting past the ice?
Not at that time, not at that instant, no.
Cousins continued going south, heading directly into Bligh Reef.
A federal investigation later found that Cousins lost track of the ship's location and didn't turn back in time. It found that reduced tanker crews probably left Cousins overworked and tired, contributing to the accident, a conclusion Cousins and Exxon disputed. The investigation faulted Hazelwood for leaving the bridge and said his judgment was impaired by alcohol. Hazelwood denied he was drunk and was later acquitted of criminal charges related to drinking.
Did they have some fault? Yes. But the real fault was there wasn't the safety net.
Spent more than $2 billion cleaning up the spill and says there was no long-term environmental damage. But pockets of oil remain beneath the surface of some beaches more than 2 decades later.
Prince William Sound is not the same as it was. The environment still has not fully recovered, and we're over 2 decades into this now.
Exxon paid $300 million to those hurt by the spill, and a jury later awarded another $5 billion in punitive damages. Exxon appealed, delaying the case for 14 years and leaving lasting bitterness in Alaska.
4,000 of the original plaintiffs have died since the Exxon Valdez.
In 2008, the Supreme Court cut punitive damages to 1/10 of the original amount.
The community is still very depressed.
Fishermen like Mike Weber say the local economy never recovered.
500 people left. That's a lot in a small community. I'll never recover from the oil spill.
After the spill, Exxon became an industry leader in safety, and millions of federal dollars were designated for cleanup research. Congress required better contingency planning, double-hull tankers, and tugboat escorts in Prince William Sound.
We were now making traffic out of Valdez probably the safest line of passage anywhere in the globe.
The explosion happened at the Deepwater Horizon rig Tuesday night.
Now everyone's hoping and praying that the Gulf of Mexico rig doesn't turn into an environmental disaster.
We're going to fight it subsea, on the surface, and on the shore.
After the BP oil spill, a presidential commission found that many lessons of the Exxon Valdez had been forgotten in the pursuit of offshore oil drilling.
I used the phrase that the offense got way ahead of the defense. The potential risks had increased dramatically, but there'd been no commensurate increase in our capability to avoid an accident or to respond to it.
It found that the major oil companies had made only a minimal investment in new response technology, and the government spent less than half the authorized amount on cleanup research.
The emphasis is always on preventing these things from occurring, because when they happen, we're not very well equipped to deal with them.
The news was again filled with the struggle to contain a massive spill, using much of the same crude cleanup technology used 20 years earlier.
We're still relying on booms, still relying on skimmers, still relying on shovels.
And response plans that were again unrealistic.
Lawmakers are alarmed that BP's competitors have given the government nearly identical emergency response plans. Those plans include steps to protect wildlife that does not even live in the Gulf.
And the government authorized BP to use nearly 2 million gallons of dispersants, though many of the same questions were still unanswered.
The key question that scientists are trying to figure out is whether oil dispersants in the deep ocean do more harm than good.
The commission also found that while tanker safety improved after Valdez, the oil industry resisted new offshore drilling safety rules.
It was reflective of a culture in the offshore oil industry. We ended up 20 years after Exxon Valdez with an even more serious incident, but no better prepared to avoid it or deal with it.
The other oil companies, including Exxon, have denied that a systemic problem exists.
We would not have drilled the well the way they did.
3 years after the spill, new commitments have once again been made to improve spill prevention and response.
3 years out from Exxon Valdez, there was still a deep commitment to applying the lessons that had been learned. 10 years out, that commitment had substantially eroded. If you come back in the year 2020 and ask, what have we learned? Are we safer? I think we'll know whether we really learned the lesson of Exxon Valdez.
Okay, any questions? Om Priyam. Om Priyam, are you present?
Present.
Parth Chaturvedi.